They say that when you are young and deeply in love, your brain operates on a dangerous wavelength. It manufactures a profound sense of invincibility, a naive belief that the rules of the ordinary world simply do not apply to you. Matteo and Elena were the embodiment of that arrogance. Just 3 days earlier, on a sunlit terrace overlooking the vibrant terracotta rooftops of Madrid, Matteo had slipped a vintage diamond ring onto Elena's finger. They were newly engaged, blissfully happy, and spending a week wandering through an old, historic European city. They prided themselves on being travelers, not tourists. They intentionally avoided the crowded plazas, the structured museum tours, and the commercial landmarks, searching instead for the raw, forgotten veins of the city. That desire for the unconventional is what led them to the Forum. It was their final night in the city. They were sitting in their rented apartment drinking cheap red wine when Matteo stumbled onto a localized urban exploration board hidden behind an unindexed network link. A user named Archon99 had uploaded a high-resolution interactive digital blueprint titled The Ossuary Lattice. It was a subterranean map detailing an ancient, heavily restricted network of catacombs snaking directly beneath the historic district they were staying in. Look at this, Elena, Matteo said, leaning over his laptop, his eyes illuminated by the cold blue glow of the screen. The thread says the main entry point is hidden inside that abandoned 19th century railway tunnel we walked past yesterday near the canal. The city sealed it with brick decades ago, but local explorers have broken a gap through the foundation. Elena leaned closer, tracing the intricate spiderweb-like grid of intersecting tunnels on the screen with her finger. The map was mesmerizing, a chaotic labyrinth of burial vaults, medieval mining siphons, and forgotten plague pits. Matteo, it looks incredible, but we don't have any gear, she said softly, a slight tremor of hesitation in her voice. We don't have helmets, boots, or ropes. We don't know anything about subterranean navigation. Matteo laughed, a confident, booming sound that bounced off the apartment's thin walls. He kissed her cheek, pulling her into his side. We don't need heavy gear, mi amor. We aren't exploring the deep Amazon. We have our phones, and the flashlights on them are incredibly bright. I've already fully cached the interactive map directly onto my phone's offline storage. We go down for an hour, take a few incredible photos with the ring, and come right back up for dinner. It'll be our own secret celebration. It was a reckless, stupid decision born of pure vanity. The next morning the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, but they turned their backs on the sun. Wearing nothing but casual sneakers, light jackets, and carrying absolutely zero food, water, or backup batteries, they slipped past the rusted, overgrown iron gates of the old railway line. Deep inside the damp shadow of the canal tunnel, hidden beneath a curtain of choking ivy, they found it. The brickwork near the drainage ditch had been violently smashed through, leaving a jagged, narrow breach just wide enough for a human body to squeeze through. Matteo shined his phone light into the gap. A steep, stone staircase descended into the absolute blackness of the earth. After you, future Mrs. Vega, Matteo smiled, stepping aside. Elena hesitated for a single second, looking back at the warm morning light filtering through the ivy at the tunnel entrance. Then she smiled, gripped Matteo's hand, and stepped through the breach, plunging them into the cold, silent dark. The transition from the world above to the world below was immediate and suffocating. The distant, comforting hum of city traffic, sirens, and pedestrian chatter vanished entirely, replaced by a heavy, pressurized silence that seemed to ring in their ears. The air was different down here. It was thick, stagnant, and carried a distinct scent of damp lime, ancient dust, and a faint, sweet undertone of decay. For the first 45 minutes, the sheer adrenaline of the exploration kept their anxiety completely at bay. They walked side by side through wide, vaulted corridors constructed from rough-hewn limestone blocks. Every few hundred yards, the tunnels would open up into smaller, circular chambers. The walls of these rooms were lined with the neatly stacked, centuries-old skeletal remains of the city's ancestors. Thousands of hollow-eyed skulls and carefully arranged femurs staring back at them in the pale beam of their phone lights. Matteo held his phone out in front of him, his thumb constantly scrolling through the digital map. According to the map file, if we turn left at this next archway, we'll hit an old underground chapel used during the 1600s, he murmured, his voice sounding flat and muffled in the cramped space. They turned left. Then they turned right. Then left again. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the architecture of the catacombs began to change. The wide, vaulted stone corridors gave way to narrow, irregular tunnels carved directly out of the raw earth and crumbling clay. The ceilings sloped downward, forcing them to hunch their shoulders and lower their heads. The ground beneath their sneakers became treacherous, transforming from dry stone into a slick, uneven mud that squelched loudly with every step. "Matteo," Elena said, stopping to wipe a layer of cold, damp sweat from her forehead. Her breathing was faster now, her chest heaving slightly. "Look at my screen. My battery is already down to 30%. Using the high-intensity flashlight mode is draining it way too fast. Let's turn back now. We have enough pictures." "Yeah, okay," Matteo replied, tapping his own screen. "Let me just check the route to make sure we don't double back." He paused. His thumb swiped frantically across the display, but the screen refused to respond. The interactive map application had completely glitched. The detailed grid of tunnels had vanished, replaced by a frozen generic loading wheel. He forced a restart of the phone, but when the device booted back up, the cached file was completely gone, corrupted by a storage data error. The digital lifeline that had guided them deep into the stomach of the maze had erased itself. "It's fine," Matteo said quickly, though the confident octave in his voice cracked slightly. "We don't need the map. We've only made 3 or 4 turns. We just turn around and retrace our steps exactly the way we came. It's a straight shot." But the catacombs were not built on a logical grid. They were a chaotic, multi-layered subterranean labyrinth of ancient mining veins, burial vaults, and Roman-era drainage siphons that crossed over, under, and through each other in 3 dimensions. Within 20 minutes of attempting to retrace their path, the reality of their situation slammed into them like a physical blow. They were entirely lost. They found themselves standing at a 5-way intersection of identical dirt tunnels, none of which looked familiar. Every archway looked exactly the same. Every wall of stacked skulls seemed to mock their lack of preparation. Panic, once a distant thought, became an overwhelming weight. It made their breathing shallow, their hearts race, and their ability to think logically completely unravel. "We went left at the wall of bones, Matteo. I am positive we did," Elena cried, her voice echoing sharply off the damp ceiling, returning to her from multiple directions. "No, we didn't. The masonry on that wall is completely different. We came from the right tunnel," Matteo shouted back, his frustration and growing terror boiling over into uncharacteristic anger. They were exhausted, their throats burning and dry from inhaling the thick, powdery dust of the tombs. They had been wandering aimlessly for over 4 hours, and their light sources were rapidly dying. Then the inevitable disaster struck. Elena's phone let out a sharp electronic chime, and the screen went entirely black. The sudden, violent loss of half their light sent a jolt of pure horror through both of them. "Stay close to me," Matteo whispered, his hand shaking as he held his own phone forward up. His battery icon was flashing a critical, ominous red, 9%. They began to hurry down a steep, descending corridor, desperate to find any landmark. But they couldn't see the ground clearly anymore. A section of rotten, centuries-old wooden timbers, buried beneath a thin layer of loose dirt and clay, snapped violently under Elena's weight. She let out a piercing scream as the ground vanished beneath her, and she slid down a steep, near-vertical mud embankment, tumbling into a lower, completely separate level of the dark network. "Elena!" Matteo screamed, lunging forward and dropping to his knees at the edge of the pit. He thrust his fading phone light down into the void. The drop-off was nearly 15 feet down, a sheer, slick wall of crumbling, wet clay. At the bottom, Elena was slowly pushing herself up onto her hands and knees, coughing violently as a thick cloud of dust billowed around her. "Matteo, I'm okay," she sobbed, her voice trembling with pain and fright. "I didn't break anything, but I can't get up. Every time I try to climb, the clay just collapses in my hands. It's too slippery. Hold on, don't panic, Matteo yelled back, his light flickering dangerously as the battery dipped to 4%. He swept the beam around the upper ledge. To his right, a narrow, terrifyingly steep staircase was carved directly into the limestone rock, looping downward into the lower gloom. There's a path over here, a set of stairs. It looks like it curves right down to where you are. Stay right where you are. Do not move. Keep talking to me so I can follow the sound of your voice. Matteo scrambled to his feet and ran down the stone steps, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The stairs emptied into a long, dark, vaulted hallway lined with crumbling stone pillars. Elena, can you hear me? Speak to me, he called out. Matteo, over here, hurry! Her voice floated back to him, but it sounded strangely muffled, distant, and distorted, coming from somewhere behind the thick, porous stone walls. He turned a sharp corner, sprinting toward the sound, but as he took his next step into the darkness, his phone screen flickered once, twice, and died completely. The darkness that slammed into Matteo was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was an absolute, crushing, sensory deprivation blackness, a darkness so thick and pure that it felt physical, like cold water pressing against his eyeballs. You could hold your hand an inch from your face for an eternity and never see an outline. Matteo stumbled blindly, his foot catching on a loose rock. He fell hard forward, his knee striking a jagged stone with a painful crack, and his dead phone slipped from his fingers, clattering into the darkness. Elena! He screamed, his voice cracking into a raw, desperate shriek. He lay perfectly still on the cold dirt, straining his ears over the sound of his own ragged, terrifyingly loud breathing. He waited for her reply, but the labyrinth was a master of acoustic trickery. The curved ceilings and porous limestone walls absorbed and deflected sound waves, bouncing Elena's voice in 3 different directions at once. Matteo, where are you? The light went away, her voice echoed, but it sounded like it was coming from above him now, then from far behind him. Deaf, blind, and consumed by a primal, maddening panic, Matteo began to crawl on his hands and knees. He scraped his palms against the rough flint and shattered bones on the floor, feeling the cold, damp walls with his bleeding fingers. He thought he was moving toward her, but with every desperate, blind movement, he was turning himself around, crawling deeper into the dark, dead-end veins of the earth, away from the woman he loved. They were separated, and the catacombs never give back what they take. For what felt like 12 hours, Matteo crawled through the absolute black. His clothes were torn, his skin was caked in ancient mud, and his throat was so dry and encrusted with dust that every breath felt like swallowing glass. He called Elena's name until his vocal cords physically seized up, reducing his screams to a pathetic, wet wheeze. He was completely disoriented, losing all concept of time, direction, and sanity. Eventually, as he dragged his battered body forward, his outstretched hand met open air. He felt the floor beneath him flatten out. He had crawled out of the tight pipe tunnels and into a massive cavernous chamber. In the distance, through the thick gloom, his eyes caught a faint, flickering orange glow. Matteo let out a choked gasp, pushing himself up onto his unstable, trembling legs. It was firelight, real burning firelight. He staggered toward the illumination like a dying man in a desert, chasing an oasis. But as he drew closer, the sweet smell of the catacombs was violently replaced by a foul, overwhelming stench, burning plastic, rotten meat, stale alcohol, and unwashed human bodies. This was not a rescue party. Huddled around a burning metal oil drum in the center of a grand, bone-lined medieval crypt was a group of 8 people. These were the subterranean dwellers, the forgotten castaways of the city above, fugitives, severe addicts, and the deeply mentally ill who had fled the law and society to create their own lawless, violent hierarchy in the deep dark. Their clothes were a patchwork of filthy rags caked in soot, and their faces were gaunt, smudged with ash, and marked by hollow, predatory eyes. "Help!" Matteo croaked, stepping into the edge of the firelight, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. His appearance was shocking, bloodied, wild-eyed, and desperate. "Please, my fiancé," she fell, "we're lost." We need to get to the surface. Please help me." The group didn't move at first. They didn't offer a bottle of water or ask if he was okay. Instead, they slowly rose to their feet, exchanging silent, knowing glances. In the lawless world beneath the streets, an outsider was not a guest. He was a resource. A large, muscular man with a matted beard and a scarred face stepped forward from the fire. A rusted iron plumbing pipe swung heavily in his right hand, tapping rhythmically against his leg. "Look what the tunnels brought us tonight," he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly snarl. Matteo backed up instinctively, but his sneakers slipped on the greasy floor. Two other figures, thin and agile as rats, stepped out from the shadows of the bone pillars behind him, completely cutting off his only exit. "Please," Matteo begged, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face. He reached into his pockets with trembling hands. "Take my wallet. There's over 300 euros in it. Take my watch, it's worth thousands. Just show me where she is, help me get her out." He threw his leather wallet and his luxury Swiss watch onto the dirt between them. The leader looked down, kicking the wallet toward the fire with his boot, a cruel, mirthless smirk spreading across his face. But as the firelight caught Matteo's raised hands, the leader's eyes locked onto something else. The glittering, solid gold band Matteo had placed on his own finger as a joke when they purchased Elena's engagement ring. "The ring too, city boy," the leader said, raising the iron pipe. Matteo clutched his hand to his chest, his knuckles turning white. "No," he whispered. "Please, no." The man lunged forward with terrifying speed. Matteo tried to duck, to fight back, but his body was completely depleted by dehydration and exhaustion. He was entirely outnumbered. The rusted iron pipe swung through the air, striking Matteo squarely across the temple with a sickening, hollow crack. Matteo collapsed instantly onto the cold, damp dirt of the crypt. As his consciousness shattered and the world faded into a final, permanent black, he could feel cold, filthy fingers violently ripping the gold ring from his finger, tearing the expensive sneakers off his feet and slicing through his pockets for anything else of value. They didn't waste any energy burying him. To these people, a body was just waste. They dragged his lifeless, bleeding form across the stone floor to a dark, unmapped drainage shaft that plummeted into the city's deep sewer network. With a heavy shove, they pushed him over the edge, letting the black, rushing subterranean waters carry his remains away into the forgotten depths of the earth. A quarter-mile away, trapped at the base of the slick clay embankment, Elena sat in the absolute, crushing darkness. "Matteo!" she called out, her voice a rhythmic, desperate chant that she repeated every few minutes. "Matteo, please, I'm here. Follow my voice." But no answer ever came. The only sound was the occasional, agonizingly slow drip, drip, drip of condensation falling from the limestone ceiling into the pools of mud around her. The silence of the catacombs was absolute, a heavy, unyielding wall that seemed to press against her chest, making it hard to breathe. By the second day, the true horror of her reality settled over her like a shroud. She had no food, but worse, she had no water. The air in this lower chamber was incredibly dry, pulling the moisture from her body with every breath. Her lips swelled, cracking and bleeding, and her throat felt like it was coated in sand. Her stomach cramped with a fierce, gnawing hunger, but she knew that hunger wouldn't kill her. It was the thirst. Human biology is a rigid, unforgiving clock, and down in the dark, that clock ticks loud. Without hydration, the body begins to systematically shut itself down to survive. By the third day, Elena's mind began to fracture. Advanced dehydration brought on vivid, terrifying hallucinations. She thought she saw the bright beams of searchlights flickering at the end of the tunnel. She thought she heard her mother's voice calling her name from the kitchen of her childhood home. She would gasp, pushing her battered body up and crawl toward the beautiful illusions, scraping her knees and tearing her fingernails against the stone, only to smash her head into a solid, cold wall of ancient skulls. By the fifth day, her kidneys began to fail. Her tongue was so badly swollen that it filled her entire mouth, making it impossible to swallow. Her skin felt like dry, fragile parchment, and she no longer had the physical strength to stand or even crawl. She dragged herself back to the base of the clay wall where she had first fallen, pulling her knees tightly against her chest, her mind drifting aimlessly in and out of a dark consciousness. She reached down with her trembling, weakened fingers and slid the vintage diamond engagement ring off her hand. She held it tightly in her palm, squeezing her fist until the sharp edges of the diamond cut into her skin, the pain being the only physical proof left to her that she was still alive, that she was a human being who had once belonged to the world of light. On the 6th day of her confinement, Elena's heart finally slowed down and stopped. She died of natural causes brought on by severe clinical dehydration, her body lying undisturbed and peaceful at the base of the wall. She was untouched by the human horrors that had claimed Matteo, preserved by the cold, dry air of the tomb. Above them, on the surface of the city, the sun continued to shine, tourists continued to take photos, and the busy traffic moved over the asphalt, completely unaware of the two souls trapped in the stone below. The digital map app on the dark web remained active, its link waiting for the next adventurous, arrogant couple to click download. Because in these catacombs there is no rescue, there is no light, and there is no exit.